Hello everyone. Alright, this is one of two lessons on the theory of international trade. You have already the trade accounts from way back in the macroeconomic metrics, but these two lessons are really about why it is that economists are almost unanimously in favor of free trade. If you think about economics as a social science, it is the nature of social science to have disagreement, whether it be in economics or psychology or sociology, history, anthropology. There's lots of disagreement. But you might be surprised to know that on the issue of trade, economists are almost unanimous that free trade is a good idea. So this first lesson is on David Ricardo's absolute and comparative advantage. Most people think trade occurs because of absolute advantage. That is, the amount produced per unit. A country has an absolute advantage in something if they can produce more of it than their trading partner with the same amount of inputs. Comparative advantage is the genius of David Ricardo. David Ricardo points out that absolute advantage doesn't really matter. Seems like it would, but it doesn't. What really matters in determining the flow of trade is comparative advantage. And comparative advantage refers to opportunity cost. That is the cost inside of each country different when they decide to produce one thing or another? Or put another way, the opportunity cost is what you have to give up in one country to produce one thing instead of something else. And if those opportunity costs are different, then the two countries will trade. It doesn't matter if there was an absolute advantage or not. And the whole point of this lesson is to kind of show you this thing that is truly counterintuitive. Okay, so let's begin. So David Ricardo created these little constructs. This is just a table, and the way to read this is these numbers here are outputs. They are not prices. The first thing that students do to get confused is they think those numbers are prices. They are not. So here's how you would read it. One worker in one day in country 1 could produce 5 units of good A or 10 units of good B. Similarly, one worker in one day in country 2 could produce 10 units of good A or only 4 units of good B. So these numbers are outputs. They are outputs from some fixed number of inputs. So you can think of it as one worker in one day with some packet of resources. In country 1 can make 5 of these or 10 of these, or down in country 2 can make 10 of these and 4 of those. It should be obvious that the cheap good in country 1 would be good B because it's easier to make, and the cheap good in country 2 would be good A. So this is a very simple case that's illustrated in Adam Smith's book, and in this case it should be obvious that country 1 will export good B and country 2 will export good A. You can see it in this little graph. So country 1 exports good B, country 2 would export good A. So that's an easy one. Now let's do one that's a little harder. Let's take these two numbers down here and let's just kind of turn them around a little bit. Now I hope you can see that the cheap good in each country is good B. So now we have a dilemma. That is, well, who's going to export what? What you have to remember is absolute advantage doesn't matter. All that really matters is comparative advantage. So let's look in country 1. These aren't prices now. One worker in one day can make 5 units of good A or 10 units of good B. So inside of country 1, this thing, good A, is about twice as expensive as good B. See that? Because you could make twice as much good B as you could good A, so good B is going to be cheaper. In country 2, it's a little more than twice. In fact, it's a little more than 3 times as much good B. So in country 2, good B is cheap, but it actually is the cheapest of the two. So it turns out, David Ricardo points out, that now country 2 then will export its cheapest good, which is good B, and country 1 will do whatever's left over, which is good A. You can see it like this. Country 1 exports good A, country 2 imports, or back this way, from our perspective over here, we're over here in country 1, import good B. Think of it this way, country 1 exports A, country 2 exports B, if you want to think of it that way. Alright, let's do another one. Now this time I'm going to make it really hard. Notice now that country 2 actually has an absolute advantage in both goods. It can produce good A more efficiently than country 1 can, and also good B. But David Ricardo's genius is absolute advantage doesn't matter. All that really matters is comparative advantage. So let's look. In country 1, good B is about half the money because they can make 5 of this or 10 of that. And in country 2, good B is a little more than, we can make a little more than 3 times as much. So it would be about a third, or actually less than a third. So good B is still the cheap good in both countries, but just like before, because the internal ratios haven't really changed. This is 1 to 2, and this is 1 to 3 and a third. So this is the cheapest good. So country 2 will export good B, and country 1 will export good A. You can see it here. Country 1 exports good A. Country 2 exports, now from their perspective, but from this country over here, it'd be an import, good B. Alright, now this one is so counterintuitive that I thought I would walk you through it. So remember that what Ricardo said is somebody in country 2 will export good B, and the person in country 1 will export good A. So I'm going to walk you through it. Imagine that you're a citizen in country 2 and you're holding 100 units of good B. Now your options are to take your good B and trade it for good A in your own country. So this 100 moved over here and turned it into good A. 100 gets about 30, so instead of 100 units of good B, you would have 30 units of good A. See how I did that? If you started with 100 units of good B over here and you traded in your own country, you could expect to get about 30 units of good A. Now let's go the other way. So here you are again. You've got 100 units of good B. You go across the border, right? There are no border police. There are no goons at the border stealing your stuff. So you still have your 100 units of good B. Now up here in country 1, 10 would trade for 5, so 100 would trade for 50. I hope you can see that you're better off if you lived in country 2 and you wanted good A. It's better to export your good B to country 1, get what you want, and bring it back into your own country, because 50 is better than 30. Now let's try it again, except this time let's try it from country 1's perspective. This is the poorer country, or the less productive country. So here you are in country 1. You have 5 units of good A. If you traded those 5 units of good A away in your own country, that 5 would become 10, right? You could probably get 10 units of good B. On the other hand, if you took your 5 units of good A and you just crossed the border, now you got 5 units of good A down here in country 2. So if 30 will get 100, you got to think about this ratio now. 30 to 100, 5 would get about 15 and a third, something like that. So if you were in country 1, you had good A and what you wanted was good B. It's much smarter to export your A down to country 2 and trade for what you want. Alright. These are the rules that I've been using to do that. So you can figure it out logically every time, but for those of you who like memorizing rules, these 3 rules will lead you to the right answer every time. Rule number 1. Search for the cheap good in each country. If it turns out that the cheap good is different in each country, then it's easy. This would be like the first example I gave you. Each country would export the cheap good. But it's possible that the cheap good would be the same in each country. If that happens, you got to go to rule number 2. If both countries have the same cheap good, then you need to search for where it's the cheapest by looking at the internal opportunity cost, right? Or what David Ricardo called comparative advantage. Look for the internal opportunity cost, find out where it's the cheapest. Wherever that is, that country will export the cheap good, and the other country will export whatever is left over. Now there is a special case, case number 3, that if there's no difference, that is, if the ratios are the same, there's no difference, then there would be no trade. Alright, so let's just try a few for practice. This is an easy one. You might stop this video and think about it. Alright, so in country 1 this is the cheap good, good B is a cheap good, and in country 2 it's good A. So in this case, country 1 would export good B, country 2 would export good A. Now this one's a little harder because the cheap good is good B in both cases. In this case it's 5 to 10, so this is about half the money. In this case it's 5 to 15, so it's absolutely the cheapest right here in country 2. So rule number 2 says country 2 will export good B and country 1 will export good A. Alright, let's try again. Now this one, country 2 has an absolute advantage in both goods, but David Ricardo points out that that's irrelevant. Don't let that mess you up. You're just looking for the cheap good. So it turns out good B is the cheap good in both countries. So now we have to look for where it's absolutely the cheapest. It's about 5 to 10 here and 50 to 150 there, so it's really the cheapest here. So country 2 would export good B, country 1 would export good A. Now what about this case? So again, good B is a cheap good in both countries. Here it's 5 to 10, that's about 1 to 2, right? And here it's 4 to 8, that's also 1 to 2. So there's no difference. No difference, so they won't trade. I think this is the last one. Down here, country 2 has an absolute advantage in both goods, but there'll be no trade. Can you see why? Because the internal opportunity cost is the same in both countries. 5 to 10 is about 1 to 2. 40 to 80 is also 1 to 2. So in this case, there will be no trade. Okay, that's it. Hope you found that helpful.